Shalom, everybody. I'm Yuval Avivi. Together with Maya Sela, I host a daily literary radio show Undercover at Kan Tarbut Station. Very glad you joined us in the third meeting of our series of meetings with Israeli writers here at the National Library of Israel. It's part of the Hebrew Book Month. We're very sorry for the delay, but now we can start, and I'm sure we'll have a great time. Let me just tell you that we can't allow everybody to open the microphones, so we will have time for questions from the audience at the end. So if you wish to ask a question, please write it in the chat box, and I'll try to ask it for you at the end of the meeting. Today's guest is one of the prominent writers in Israel, one of Israel's leading female voices. I'm very happy to have here tonight Dorit Rabinyan. Shalom.
Shalom, Yuval. Good evening.
Good evening. Dorit Rabinyan published her first novel at the early age of 22. It quickly gained wide readership in Israel. The novel Persian Brides dealt with a small Jewish community in Iran, and specifically with the fate of women in this community who are forced to be married at a very young age. Her second novel, A Strand of Thousand Pearls, deals with Mizrahi integration into Israeli society while looking at the past of Mizrahi Jews in Iran, in Turkey, in India, and obviously later in Israel. Again, the issues of women's rights and women's ability to control their own body is a key element in this book also. Her third novel, All the Rivers, touched an open wound in the Israeli society and told the love story of an Israeli Jewish woman and a Palestinian man. Her novels have been translated into more than 20 languages worldwide. They became bestsellers. And also, we will talk about that. In January 2016, All the Rivers became the focus of a political scandal in Israel when it was rejected by the Ministry of Education. And a lot of people think it was because of the subject that it dealt with, the love between a Jewish Israeli woman and a Palestinian man. Again, shalom, Dorit Rabinyan.
Hello from Tel Aviv.
So it's not a normal day today, I'm sure, for every woman in the world, whether you're an American or not. We have to start today with the American Supreme Court decision to overturn Roe versus Wade, and actually making abortions not legal in many of the states in the United States. And you dealt with women rights and with the lack of their control over their own bodies in your books. You dealt with this in your first book, and I think in all your books, the subject of women's rights is a key element. I must ask, how do you feel today about this, and how do you feel regarding your books, regarding the issues that you touched in your first novel and then later?
It's always when liberties of women are being intimidated by patriarchal old values or old gestures that I am re-acknowledging how fortunate I was to be born in Israel and how much Israeli Jewish women are in debt, are obliged to the redemption that is being given to us, being born with so much privileges. And it's a conversation that I've been maintaining with my grandma, thanking her for giving me this gift of being given with all the privileges that I enjoy. And this is what makes me, perhaps unawarely, be in need to tell the stories of mothers and mothers of mine that weren't so free, so educated, so in control of their wishes, to be in contact with my desires. And yes, I very often think of myself as still a Persian Jew minority woman living under this kind of suppression, and re-acknowledging of what I was granted with. All these liberties of controlling my life, controlling my body, controlling my thinking, my freedom of expression, thought, and this is a major fruit that we Israelis were enjoying and not very often appreciate.
But it seems so fragile, right? It seems not secure at all today, because in your first novel you talked about marrying at the age of 15, of the age of 13, being a very obviously having sex with much older men, being pregnant at a very young age. All these seems like telling the story of your grandmothers, and then comes this day, and it's not their story anymore. It's the story of every woman, right? Because you feel like a thing of the past might be a thing of the near future, or the thing of the present, when your rights are being taken from you. So maybe
I think it might be too pretentious to equalize the position of nowadays American women to all days early 20th century Iranian girls.
Of course.
But it's true that there is an ancient fear of women leading their life, obeying the desires of their own hearts. It seems like this could be a link between this fragility of what is known to be obvious.
Do you think that
it has to be kept, it has to be preserved, it has to be guarded, it has to be shifted within the range of human rights, and not be somehow taken as feminism? Right. Feminism, women rights should be under the roof of human rights.
Do you feel that literature has the ability to preserve this right, to make a change, that people might read your books, Margaret Atwood's books, and say, okay, this must be protected, like you say, that literature has a role, has the ability to make people think to think differently about this subject?
I think that ever since 2016, the spirit of this time is to be surprised by any movement of what we are taking to be reality. So when life is being so fictionalized, so fictitious, when so much of what we consider to be an authority, or is what is to be the ground that we walk upon, is being questioned again, it makes literature to be somehow, I mean, fiction is a fruit of the imagination combined with our experience of life, added with the power of language. But when we see the storyteller of our existence being like going like woo, you know, we should have rethinking what we take for granted.
I must say that maybe there's any, I made the wrong impression that the women in your books are somehow fragile or weak, which is not the case at all. Some of them are very strong in their way sometimes, not in a common way. But I want to ask you about how you play maybe with the structure of power between men and women in your novels, especially in the latest, in All the Rivers, where it's true that there's a relationship between a man and a woman, which is obviously a relationship in which the man is always stronger and the woman is weaker. That's the way we perceive it, right? But then the woman is an Israeli Jew and the man is a Palestinian. And so you play with the structure of power because if you think about nationality, he's on the weaker side. We are the Israeli woman is the occupier in this in a more broad view of the relationship. So maybe maybe the women in your books are not as weak as one might think, and especially in this book, it's a very delicate and not common discussion of the structure of power between men and women. Do you agree?
I think that you pinpoint a particular aspect of the relationship of the love story between the Israeli woman and the Palestinian man. She belongs to the more stronger tribe in this clash, in this conflict between Israelis and Palestinians. But I believe that her position as the narrator of the story, as the one that the perspective is being delivering the encounter with the Palestinian men, allowed me to express or explore her fears as much, or perhaps her internalized anxieties being given by the Israeli education system or the Israeli DNA from the diaspora, and the fact that he is in a weaker position by being suppressed by occupation from the day he was born. She, in a way, is a much more complex or ambivalent entity. Her identity is the one that I go more in a deeper resolution, and the more complex it is, it makes her more weak. But I do agree that New York as the arena overseas that allows them to know each other. Sorry, I need to have this off. Sorry. Is over. They meet in New York where all the opportunities are open. It's the land of all opportunities. Yet she has forces within her that pull her back from the freedom of loving the man she fell in love with. So I believe that inherited fears make us weaker, and himself is being given the powers of being a man, and he has the freedom of being a Muslim, and I will explain. Because being a Jew is being educated to exclusivity, and by that you're not inclusive in the people you want to let in your life. And this is a heritage that us Israelis imported from 2,000 years of being stateless. So it's not that the strong is being kept with one dimension of having the strength, and the one that is being suppressed is always the one that is looking up. It's you have to maintain some sort of a common ground, and New York does provide me the common ground for them to see eye to eye and to equalize between their rights and their liberties, and to be able for the very first time in their life to see the opposite identity and to acknowledge it for its good and bads, to see how much similarities they share that are far beyond in their are far more major than the differences.
And also, I find it in the book, maybe that's what's most frightening for Israelis that read it, some Israelis that read it, is the fact that at many points they are not an Israeli woman and a Palestinian man, they are just man and woman, right? And that there are many scenes in the book that you would be able to say, well, it doesn't matter who is Palestinian and who is Jewish Israeli at this particular scene. They're just men and women, and maybe nationality is not as important. And for us to think that nationality is not important and we can be just people, not Israeli versus Palestinian, it's a frightening idea for many Israelis.
And for my heroine, for my narrator, my Israeli character it's really a fear of being devoured, to have the love intimidate her identity, to have it subsumed, and to have it somehow in a this COVID has taken my vocabulary 2.5 years within the green line. The fear of losing yourself is some risk that you have to give into within falling in love, especially if the one is your foe, is considered to be your enemy. So the quest to see eye to eye, to acknowledge the humanity of the one you love, or the one opposite your position, is the one that gives you the right to consider yourself humanistic.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, from my perspective, looking back at the scandal, the political scandal of banning all the rivers, has to do not for the arguments that were stated in the report by the Ministry of Education. It's not that, as they said, that it's a dangerous to the Jewish identity, that the book is intimidating the Jewish identity of the young readers. It's because it's humanistic. It's because it draws the character of the Palestinians to be as equal, as human, as relatable, as lovable. And for that, I take responsibility. I wasn't aiming to threaten the Jewish identity of anybody. I was just suggesting that under this wave of nationalistic, chauvinistic, messianic climate in Israel, of more than a decade under the regime of Netanyahu, young people can be suggested with a new perspective of what they consider Israel to be.
Let's talk a little bit about this scandal that you mentioned. It was a big issue in Israel. It became a big issue in the States also. What was it like? You know, it's not very common that books find their way in Israel to the news, and become such a political issue. It's not very common that we hear that. Maybe we will hear more and more about incidents like this, but I think it was very major in the Israeli literary scene. It was very unique. And what was it like to be in the middle of all of this ordeal, of this scandal? You just wrote a book, right?
just for knowledge, this is the very first time ever in the Israeli history that a book is being banned. The book is being expelled from curriculum of high school studies, and it has never been repeated ever since. So I think it's more of an example of the extraordinary proving of how rare this might happen. And I don't think it's going to be repeated, because I think the criticism that the Ministry of Education were facing will be a reminder for them not to circle around a piece of art, a work of art, because inevitably it turns this literary work to become a political symbol. And if it wasn't for so many Israelis who were supporting me and were backing my book, and if it wasn't for my older brothers, the authors that were literally were my bodyguards when I was attacked by who is known nowadays as the former Prime Minister of Israel, Mr. Naftali Bennett, who had actively, ruthlessly, knowingly was personally attacking me, and I suffered persecution by his electorate, and his followers were very much were into causing me, let's say, to say the least, discomfort.
So, and it became even more extreme since then, I think. It became the climate that you talk about 6 years ago. It hasn't became more liberal and more accepting for this kind of relationship, this kind of humanistic views. It became more and more extreme, and
I think it brings me back to storytelling.
Yeah,
because the more you see a gap between the story that Israelis are telling themselves, the more we are more convinced with our narrative, with what we consider to be the truth, the absolutely only one truth, the more we convince the younger generation, and the more we, in a way, keep them hostage to this misleading of ourselves. And this the more we fortified, the more we create barrier between ourselves and the acknowledgement that there is another truth, there is another rationality, there is another narrative, the more you see two tribes, two neighbors telling themselves a whole different story, and bad guys and good guys in the Middle East, they are not absolute. This is a special place where good and bad are very elusive. Morning time, we're the good guys. Afternoon, we became the bad guys. The day after, we switch. And this is not a stable. You only need to explore and experience a day in a life of this conflict to acknowledge that it's storytelling. we were named the people of the book, and we are still convincing ourselves with one truth in one book. But there are other stories that we like very much to suppress and throw back and overlook, and this is still happening in the backyard of Israel. There is a major scene in All the Rivers where the Israeli character is observing what she considers to be home via the lens of a home video that her Palestinian boyfriend is receiving from Ramallah. And she sees Israel from the 9th floor of a building in Ramallah, and she realizes how much Israel is being seen via the eye of the Palestinian neighbor. So we cannot take ourselves to be, we cannot take our neighbors to be as blinded as we would like to take ourselves.
I want to go back to the books, and not only as a political issue and a political thing, but also as maybe as a string of novels. I think, because I think that All the Rivers is a little bit different from the first two books you published, right? Would you agree? It's a little bit different in language. It deals with more current people, and it has this less, I don't know, this, how do we call it? Fantastic characteristics, right? That were more prominent in your first two novels. It's more grounded. It has less magic in it, I think, maybe. And one could say that it's very different from the first two, but then again, maybe it's a string of novels. Maybe I'm asking, maybe your novels transfer the Mizrahi woman in time and space from the past in Iran through the
Israeli. Yeah, you're right. You can see that there is a path of me looking back to my ancestor mothers and observing them as young girls being engaged and married and give birth at a very young age, and how the character that is being inspired by my grandma is becoming a heroine. Who becomes a hero of a story is the one that holds the reins of his life and navigates his path towards his dream, towards his necessities. Mm-hmm. And the second one is takes place at the Israeli peripheria, that is not that much distant from the center, yet is more deserted, neglected, left behind. And those girls who are being brought in Israel, being born in Israel to the sons and daughters of immigrants from Iran, are being held in some in-between identity of sons and daughters of immigrants, but those who do the immigration action twice a day, because their parents had immigrated once, and they themselves, they travel from home to the Israeli surrounding, back to their Iranian home twice a day, and they struggle with perhaps achieving some sort of peace or some sort of harmony between those two spaces or spheres. And the third one, All the Rivers, takes place in New York, so it's more realistic, it's true, yet the pounding heart of the story is the fact that we are sculptured and molded, and we're designed by those powers of education, by those powers of ancient and perhaps fearful obeys that we had been given by the older generations. And I think it's more abstract, the fears that we don't relate to our own, but I find them to be charged with more strength. They sometimes make decisions for us unknowingly from the subconscious that is being molded. There's a saying in Hebrew that a person is being molded by the landscape of the place he was born and raised at. And the emotional landscape that we carry everywhere we go. even if we cross borders and even if we overcome obstacles, still there is a pounding power that draws us back to the habitat, to the nurturing or nurturing place where we inherited the outlook.
I want to ask about your first novel and about you when it was published, because you were very young. You were 22, and you became a literary sensation in Israel. It was
Back
sure
then,
it was
back then
overwhelming.
you could have become a literary sensation. Nowadays, nowadays I wouldn't be given the same entrance and acceptance. In the mid-90s, literature was this fancy, huge boat that I came on board, and I was so fortunate for the timing, and I was so fortunate for being a feminine storyteller of Mizrahi Jews, of Mizrahi women that had been appearing after 2 decades of storytellers, Israeli storytellers of immigrants from Muslim countries that they were not accepted as well, as easily, as festively. So I owe my acceptance to Sami Michael, Eli Amir, Amnon Shamush, all those who were struggling with the Israeli hegemony, who considered only one narrative. Does this ring a bell? Only one narrative to be told.
So it was very exciting, but also it's overwhelming, especially if you consider the role that they put on your shoulder, because there were not so many Mizrahi authors in Israel. It was Ashkenazi, I don't know,
Orient.
And there were even fewer Mizrahi women writers, right? And when you wrote your first novel, you became very, very successful at a very short time, and you became this Mizrahi feminine voice. And I'm sure it's not only it's also a burden at a very young age to become this voice, this important voice. Maybe it's not a burden. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
It could be taken as a burden, but once you step into your study, you are not the persona, the public persona that is being. I mean, it's the most intimate craft, and the more private you go, the more universal you get. So you mentioned that my books are being translated to more than 20 languages. We had passed the 30.
Oh,
so it's more than 30 languages, and I owe this achievement both to my agent and both to the fact that I don't aim to tell a story of a community. I tell a story of private, intimate psyches, and I use them as the mirror of my own self riddle. I have found that the more mysterious spot you relate with in your storytelling, the more driven you are to maintain this ongoing craft of storytelling. You need a blind spot or perhaps a subliminal question about yourself, and the deeper you go, the more curious you get. So it's staging a performance of control, but once you established it, you can departure from it and surprise yourself with so much that you unaware of. Because, for example, All the Rivers, when I wrote it, I wasn't I wasn't taking under consideration that I'm stepping on this Israeli nerve.
Right.
I was in need to portray my Israeli portrait, and I used New York as a telescope to draw what it is to me, a homeland. And I needed to go to exile to say something about what I considered to be the water that the fish is swimming in. I needed to step out. So how did I get to New York? This is the working space of an author is the identity. It's always the identity. So it's my Persian identity. It's my daughter of immigrants identity, is my Israeli identity, is my Mizrahi identity, my feminine identity. I have 5 drawers that you can put me in. and I'm glad to provide a variety of criteria that I relate to. But eventually, when you do when you own the skill, you own also the acknowledgement that it's your own identity, that you research, that you investigate, that you aiming to portrayal.
But I must ask you, do you think it's good for an author to succeed very much in his first novel? Does it affect your writing?
I thought you would say, you were asking me, is it good for an author to be narcissistic?
No, to succeed, to be very successful.
Because to be an author is to accept the fact that this is a supply of narcissistic satisfaction. Otherwise, you won't be able to suspend your life and to commit to the ongoing process of writing a novel. So accept that. It's not for altruistic creatures. It's for those who need to observe their own. But I don't think a success or acknowledgement at a young age is a benefit. It should come earlier on, and I can witness that I had a decade of not a blockage, but a stage fear that for it I had shelved a whole novel that according to my editor was good enough, but I found it to be full of faults and was scaring me so much. And it's only recently that I read it again due to COVID again. And I realized what was perhaps the unconscious reason for me to get such cold feet to get it published. But the official reason, sorry?
Can you share it with us, or is it too personal?
It had dealt with unaware autobiographical experience from my past, and I was somehow dealing with it, but unknowingly, or perhaps I wasn't ready to cope with it. So when it was the time to deliver, I was like saying, no, there is no book.
Do you think that maybe in the future you feel more comfortable publishing it, or is it gone for good? It's done.
No, it's gone for good, and it relates me again to your question about success.
Yeah.
I was more ambivalent with the concept of success because I was given it so easily.
Mm.
So I was I was corresponding with my more of not unsuccessful friends and finding them to be much more superior because they weren't so popular. It's thoughts that you go through when you're 22 and being so praised, and you have this very healthy posture syndrome of feeling that at any point somebody is going to tap on your shoulder and say, "Go. We realize that you're not as good." And you know what? I keep this within me because I identify so much with this posture position. I find it to be really good for labor. It makes you work harder and more efficient. I mean, the more you believe of what is being told about you, the more you become less loyal artist to your mission.
So you were mentioning not a writer's block, but a writer's cold feet. So maybe the audience, the people in the audience don't know. 4 years, only 4 years passed between the publication of your first novel and then and the second, but then 15 years until the next novel in 2014. But now it has been 8 years since then. Are you writing something now?
I just wrote my editor this morning. I said, I need more time. I need more time because I have to deliver the upcoming book for his editing process.
Oh,
and
so you have one.
I have a pathology that I can't let go of the work as easily as I hope one day I will achieve. There's a saying that there is no painting that is being finished to be painted, that it's only been stopped.
Yeah.
So
You never finish, you only stop.
You stop painting a new painting. So it's the same with books, but I think the literary work is more patty. You have to stick to all the details and create a whole world that is believable, that would be for its originality. And there's another thing, that it has to have a long life on the shelf. You have to trust it to be ultimately done, to be able to bear it. So when time comes after a year or more, so I don't open my earlier novels, not to face all the failures that I didn't caught on time, but the endurance of writing a book, of writing it with the most fundamental powers of writing, I believe it to take time, and there is no easy way. The more dimensional your book wishes to be, the more time you have to devote.
Let me ask you one last question before we move on to the questions from the audience. I must ask though, because is it different when you're being translated, that the process that you're talking about? You have to be really precise. You have to have a complete world. You have to have every word in the right place. And that's what you were describing. And is it different when your book is being translated? Do you let go of being in such control? Is it how is the process of being translated to other languages? How is it different from writing your own book?
In Hebrew.
Yeah.
Because I'm a Hebrew writer.
Yeah.
My spirit speaks Hebrew, thinks Hebrew, feels Hebrew. So I define my ability within this space of from the first letter of Hebrew Aleph to the last one Taf. I don't own any other, and I don't pretend or aim. So I don't take under consideration my dear translators, and I trust them to do the best work. And as I said, I'm following my big brothers, Grossman, שיהיה בריא 120, יהושע, Oz. And if you have your translator to be the one that is serving Grossman's work, like I was fortunate enough to be having All the Rivers translated by Jessica Cohen, who has done marvelous work for him, then you can trust that it's going to be at least as good. And I owe the singing of my prose to my translators. So I'm not going to follow. I have few languages. This is Swedish, go figure, Indonesian,
Wow.
Italian,
Fantastic.
Dutch, Spanish, Chinese, Slovakian. Do I need to study Slovakian to read my book? No.
Oh, it must be so exciting to meet all these new audiences, right? All these different languages. Must be very exciting to have this experience, to have this completely other people, other nationalities that maybe they know nothing about the topics that you deal with in your books until they read you. You open a whole new world for them.
You know, social media has one benefit, that I wake up every day and I get letters from readerships around the globe, and I always feel that it's a privilege due to the fact that I'm doing my work, and my work is to look within. And the more I describe what I know of, the better chances that I'm gonna describe what it is to be a human being in a certain circumstances. And identification is not being kept within your language or your nationality or continent. If you're telling a story about humans and you're doing it with passion, then more likely that you're gonna find readerships of people that you could never imagine that are gonna find themselves within the portrait you had portrayed yourself.
Maybe a few questions from the audience now, if it's okay.
Thank you.
They're asking us, I read your book. They mentioned the Hebrew name, Gader Chaya, which I'm not sure how to translate it literally to English. It's
this is why the title in Hebrew had not traveled to any of the translation except for the żywopłot, which is a hedge in Polish.
Yeah.
And Gader Chaya, which is a hedge in Arabic. The combination of a fence, a green fence, a living fence in Hebrew is very poetic.
Yeah.
But
maybe we should explain that Gader Chaya in Hebrew means a fence that has plants on it, that has some bushes on it, and it divides two houses.
One yard from another.
One yard from another. Yeah, with plants, with green leaves, right? It's a beautiful thing. Instead of having a brick wall, you have this wall of greens, and so where you're being asked, can you comment on why and how you selected the title in Hebrew?
In Hebrew, when I found it, I felt like I I stepped into my home slippers. I felt like, okay, this is the title of the book I've been writing for 6 years, and I didn't have the right title. When I realized that this combination of a barrier that is portable, that is planted within the conscience, that could be traveled within, I realized that it's so miraculously and so beautifully described and so easily with 2 words only what I've been spending almost 350 pages to describe.
Yeah.
And this element of gardening is only the first layer. Within it carries something of a threat, because a barrier that has a life of its own, like Gader Chaya means, could be moving. And the question, where do I begin and you end, where do you end and I begin, is perhaps something that should be overlooked, not overlooked, guarded, where the line is drawn today.
Another question from the audience is how your surroundings affected your writing, if it did.
I'll take this question to the sense of nationhood. The fact that I felt that I'm corresponding with my camp, the peace camp in Israel, that I sometimes feel that is not as respectful towards the need to define your tribe, the need for nationhood, this sense of belongingship is not as respected, because we're not cosmopolitan creatures. We're not universal creatures. We are very much located in our identity, and people should be respected for this need as humans. And I always find this progressive urge to have this small village and all these stories about humanity is being one. No, we should take under consideration that humans have this urge to belong and to have their identity not only shaped, but also defined by its contour, by its outlines.
One more question. Oh, we have five more minutes, right? Because we started late, so we have time for a few more questions, right? It's okay with you?
I'm here. I'm yours.
Susanna Wind asks you, when did you know you were a writer?
When I was told. I never nominated myself. I never had approached some committee.
When did you start? When did you start to want to write? At what age did you start writing? Maybe.
I hope Susanna won't be disappointed by me saying that while writing my debut novel at the age of 21, which was 2 years ago, I realized by the fact that my work was becoming, I realized that I'm becoming the writer I never dreamed of being. So in a way, the craft was advancing my wishes. And I'm sorry to say that, because I know so many writers to be are aspiring to be writers. And I was given this opportunity to publish a written story of mine at a very young age and without me chasing it. So I'm saying this is a Cinderella story, dismiss yourself from it. Afterwards comes a hard labor. And I also want to add, it's not only the labor, it's the sweetness of being devoted to a story that gives you so much vitality and so much sense of being that it's worth it. It's only if books would survive this changing era and technology overtaking the time and the attention. This I appreciate whom is with us tonight for the fact that literature still gets you going, and to have a discussion about literature to be a good excuse to be reminded with what you appreciate.
Sandy Wasserman asks us, since the Supreme Court decision, if you were writing All the Rivers Now, would you still choose New York or an other American liberal city for the location? Because it seems that the US may not be the safe haven you might have thought it to be. Maybe you described New York as a place of opportunities. That's how the US is described all the time. Maybe it doesn't have all the opportunities that we think.
It's a great question, but it has nothing to do with the decision of the Supreme Court, because I don't think New York is going to be changed by night. And even if it's going to be opposed, it's not going to be opposed on the New York State. But New York had become so capitalistic and so money oriented and so expensive that it had changed majorly. Because my story is placed on 2002, on the winter of between 2002 and 2003. And the more I visit New York, the more alienated I feel to those areas that I considered them for a while to be my second home or my home away from home. And now I'm being taken as a walking wallet, and I don't accept that to be, so expensive, it's not fun anymore. So it's a great question. Perhaps it would have been a different space that had given the same circumstances to my characters to get acquainted, fall in love, and maintain their love for at least one season. But it has to be transatlantic, and it has to be extremely cold. So it could have been Toronto.
It's funny that you describe New York like this, because you'd think when you think about it, a struggling young artist like sorry,
Hellmuth
would never be able to live in New York nowadays. He won't find an apartment. Also in Tel Aviv, actually, it would be very difficult to put it in Tel Aviv or in New York. You can't be a struggling artist in these cities anymore.
Even back then in 2002, I placed him in Bay Ridge Avenue, Bay Ridge area, which is down Brooklyn. And it's
not a very good apartment.
Much cheaper, much more like New York of immigrants before perhaps the tech boom that made New York to be a capital of money, of finances.
One last question from the audience, because we have to go, but it's a great question, and we touched it a little bit earlier, but maybe it's more accurate the way it's asked in the audience. Jewish women are strong from the time of the Bible. However, the law and the narrative makes them subordinate. As a young Jewish woman, how do you see the role of powerful women in the future?
Wow, it is a great question.
Yes.
Perhaps it should be left as a great question because my answer is gonna somehow decline the level.
We want the truth. We seek the truth only.
Yes, the truth is good. We should put our bets on women because the more of the revolt, the more of the opposition, the more resistance, the more subversive action that we're required to do, the more stronger we become. It's physics, and this is the reaction I believe that the decision by the Supreme Court of yesterday is gonna evolve into. We're gonna see a rise of feminism. We're gonna see a struggle, but there's a triumph waiting ahead. So I hope the minimized victims would be, but the major achievement it would get. Anything you suppress becomes stronger from within. So I encourage you guys overseas. I thank you, and I want to add, excuse me, New York, for being so notoriously spoken about you, but this October I'm going to resume my tours in America, and I look up to America. This is a place where we owe so much to in discourses around the world that we forgot its source. So it should be reshaken and re-acknowledged and appreciated for what it had given, and the ally is going to be kept between women around the world, and particularly this Israeli woman and my friends in America, in the US. Where can we find your US tour schedule? I'm gonna answer this question that I've seen I'm gonna start in LA late October and travel east. So I think my first stop in LA is gonna be, you know what? I'm gonna publish it on my Instagram account, Twitter account, and Facebook account. So please visit me, and I will provide this information as well.
Fantastic. I think with this optimistic declaration, I think maybe a promise, an optimistic promise, we can say that this was a great talk with you. Thank you so much for being.
Yuval, we should get together more often. It's good.
Yes. Yes, and in real life, where they don't know, but we were supposed to meet and do it together, and we didn't manage because of technical issues. We should totally meet in real life. Dorit Rabinyan, thank you so much for being here with us this evening. Thank you so much for all the people in the audience. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for the National Library of Israel for having us here and for doing this series of meeting with Israeli writers. Thank you so much, everybody, and have a great evening.
Good night. Thank you.
Out.